You've probably heard this story before. You can find several versions of this story online. This is just one. Famous comedian Jackie Gleason, known as the Great One, was a not-so-secret Fortean. He possessed a very large paranormal library. His interest in UFOs was well known. In 1971, he visited the White House and he asked President Nixon for the straight scoop on flying saucers. Nixon told him to show up at MacDill Air Force Base just outside of Tampa a few days later. Once there, Gleason would see something special. When Jackie Gleason showed up at MacDill, he was escorted into a dark storage building where he had to pass through elaborate security measures. Finally, he was brought into a large room where odd debris lay on the floor. Holding one piece of this debris, Gleason found it to be both flexible and extremely light. An officer identified the material as coming from Roswell. In another room, Gleason was shown 2 alien cadavers, a little over 4 feet tall, stored within glass containers. That's the story. Now, if you are of a certain age, you are probably picturing Jackie Gleason as Ralph Cramden. Anyways, the story I just gave you is the tale as it appears in Albert Rosales' book, Humanoid Encounters. Rosales adds this comment: Beverly McKittrick, Gleason's ex-wife, later wrote a book about him, which included what he told her about his trip to MacDill. Here's the problem. No such book exists. Now, I enjoy Rosales' work, but he really should have double-checked. Rosales says that he got his version from a ufologist named Bill Nell. Bill Nell wrote up his own account in a 2025 article published on Medium. Nell says that he got the story from Gleason himself in 1982. And here's an excerpt from Nell's article. The experience of seeing the object and the bodies affected Gleason more than he first realized. Although he had a hit variety show on CBS, Jackie walked away from everything for a few years to study more about UFOs and the paranormal. It wasn't until 1975 that he went back to work in a meaningful way. This claim, at least, is provably false. Jackie did not walk away from television. He was cancelled. The cancellation hurt him terribly. He never again was the boss of his own small media empire. There are several biographies of Jackie Gleason. None of them mention him taking a sabbatical to study UFOs. These days, a lot of people seem to be under the impression that when you're dealing with a celebrity, it's okay simply to make up stories. No, that's not true. Yes, Jackie Gleason did have an interest in UFOs. In my opinion, his views were quite sensible. He thought that the literature of ufology contains a whole bunch of really silly claims, but some reports require serious investigation. That also happens to be my own view. As for Bill Nell, well, frankly, I am not a huge fan. His documentary about the so-called Philadelphia experiment is filled with completely inane claims and very little in the way of skeptical rebuttal. For a much healthier take on that mythology, I suggest that you watch the YouTube documentary by Emily Louise. It is remarkable. I guess I have to mention that there have been certain accusations against Bill Nell, but I would advise caution here. There is so much acrimony in ufology that pretty much anyone who enters the field will be attacked at one point or another. All I could do is advise you to seek out both sides of the question. Remember, all arguments have counter-arguments. If anybody out there can confirm that Bill Nell actually did meet Jackie Gleason, I will happily present the evidence here. A ufologist named Larry Warren, sometimes known as Art Wallace, also claims to have heard the story from Gleason himself. Well, frankly, we have even better reason to question Larry Warren's credibility. Warren said that he got the story during a 1986 visit to Gleason's home in New York. Here's the problem. Gleason did not have a home in New York in that year or even in that decade. Jackie Gleason lived in Florida from 1964 until his death in 1987. Both Nell and Warren placed the big event at MacDill Air Force Base, and that brings us to another problem. You see, there was an original version of this story, but that version mentioned Homestead Air Force Base. I'm sorry, but getting the basic location right, that's not too much to ask for. In the original account, Gleason visited the base on his own. In later versions, Richard Nixon and Gleason visit the base together. Some people say that Nixon picked up Gleason in Nixon's own convertible without Secret Service. A few people have even claimed that Nixon and Gleason drove all the way from Florida to Area 51 while Nixon was president. That must have been one hell of a road trip. No Nixon biographer depicts the president as expressing an interest in UFOs. Yes, Nixon and Gleason played golf together, but those who say that Nixon and Gleason were close friends, they don't cite any biographies of either man. whatever else you might say about Nixon, he did know something about national security. Jackie Gleason was not the sort of person in whom one would confide a truly spectacular piece of classified information, not unless one wanted that information to reach the public. In the early 1970s, Gleason was drinking heavily, he was popping pills, his show had been canceled, and he had become depressed, hardly the sort of individual one would trust with the ultimate secret. One YouTube version of the story holds that Nixon blabbed while drinking. This is nonsense. First, Nixon did not drink heavily, at least not until his final days in office. Second, even if Nixon did tie one on, when he sobered up, he could have stopped Gleason's visit to the Air Force Base with one phone call. So, how did the story originate? We are told that the story came out because Gleason revealed the secret to his then wife, a woman named Beverly McKittrick. Supposedly, Jackie divorced her in 1974, shortly after he found out that she had blabbed everything to a writer for Esquire magazine. The Esquire story is referenced in Larry Holcomb's book, The Presidents and UFOs. Oddly, Holcomb does not cite the article. Why not? Simple. No such piece has ever appeared in Esquire. Nobody published anything about this tale until August the 16th, 1983. It appeared in the National Enquirer, not exactly the nation's most reputable news source. The byline on the 1983 piece reads, Beverly Gleason, that is Beverly McKittrick. The story is told in the first person, yet Beverly obviously was not the author. This thing is written in the Enquirer's house style, which is easily recognizable. Note well, the Enquirer version of the story featured Homestead Air Force Base, not MacDill, and of course it made no mention of Roswell. And there are other differences from the versions that we see in circulation today. The article claims to be excerpted from an upcoming book by Beverly McKittrick. Since that book never materialized, a skeptic might suppose that the Enquirer concocted the whole thing. Perhaps. Perhaps not. It gets complicated. In 2003, Beverly McKittrick told MUFON investigator Kenny Young that Jackie Gleason did indeed come home late one night, and he told a wild story about aliens. Not only that, Beverly insisted that she had given a full account of this incident to a writer for Esquire magazine in 1974. Oddly, Beverly made no reference to the piece bearing her byline, which was published in the National Enquirer in 1983. Now, Kenny Young, I am told, is no longer with us. Now, he had a reputation as a semi-skeptic, not a hardcore debunker, not a wild-eyed true believer, so I feel quite comfortable stipulating that he did not concoct these chats with Beverly McKittrick. That said, I wish somebody would release a recording of McKittrick telling the story in her own voice, if such a recording still exists. In her communications with Kenny Young, Beverly McKittrick insisted that Esquire magazine really did publish the story in 1974. She told Young, "I'll be honest with you. About the time the article appeared, Jack and I were breaking up, and when he saw the Esquire article, that just finished everything." Her insistence on this point damages her credibility. No such article ever appeared, not in Esquire, not in any other periodical throughout the 1970s. People have checked. If such a noteworthy piece had appeared in 1974, it would have instantly found its way into the files of hundreds, maybe thousands of researchers. The UFO News Clipping Service would have reprinted it. Paperback books and 14 periodicals would have cited it endlessly. Young goes on to offer this quote from Beverly McKittrick. "I just made that one statement about the UFOs, and it appeared in Esquire and I guess a few other places, and he didn't like that, and I thought, I just can't go through with this. Let him live his life. So I never wrote the book." In 1992, a respected journalist named William A. Henry III wrote a Gleason biography titled The Great One, The Life and Legend of Jackie Gleason. While researching the work, Henry interviewed McKittrick. She mentioned nothing about Gleason's alleged secret trip to view an alien cadaver. Why would McKittrick keep that information from a well-known writer like Henry, while divulging it more than a decade later to a ufologist like Kenny Young? Obviously, if the 1974 Esquire story were real, Henry would have known about it. He would have mentioned the matter in his book, if only to debunk it. As for the 1983 Enquirer report, I assume Henry just considered that publication unworthy of his notice. The book describes Beverly McKittrick as a secretary from Baltimore who hastily married Jackie Gleason in the summer of 1970. According to Henry, they had nothing in common other than a shared affection for the bottle. Although Henry doesn't call McKittrick an alcoholic, the picture he paints is not flattering. One Gleason friend is quoted as saying, "Beverly encouraged the dark side of Jackie, the drinking, the carousing, staying up all night, being out of shape and not taking care of himself. Henry goes on to write, by his own admission, in this period, Jackie often got only 2 or 3 hours of sleep a night. His weight began to seesaw again, a condition even more dangerous than permanent obesity, according to researchers, and his temper, never entirely controlled, often flared. The marriage seemed not to agree with Beverly either. She aged rapidly in appearance and looked haggard by the time she and Jackie divorced in November 1974. Another source told Henry that the union was a real marriage for only about a weekend. According to Henry, Jackie tried to reconcile with Beverly after the divorce, but everything ended badly. During her time with Jackie Gleason, Beverly lived quite well. In the divorce, she asked for half of his net worth, estimated at that time to be $3.5 million. She received far less than that. By 1983, the money was no doubt gone or nearly gone. So, this woman was bitter, and she had a strong financial incentive to monetize her story, all of which suggests an obvious theory. Hurting for cash, McKittrick and a rather shady writer for the National Enquirer came up with a plan. He would ghostwrite a book for her. The book would include a story about Jackie and Nixon and UFOs. With that angle, the book stood a good chance of becoming a bestseller. The National Enquirer story served as a teaser for the book. So, who was the writer? In those days, the Enquirer did a lot of UFO stories, and this is a bit mysterious because the UFO stories were rather less popular than the articles containing piffle about celebrities. The chief UFO expert at the Enquirer was a man named Bob Pratt. Now, if you are an old-time Fortean researcher and you recall those days, you will know that Pratt played a complex role in the creation of what some people now call dark ufology. That is a catch-all term which some people use to summarize all of those myths and rumors which became quite popular in the later 1980s and the 1990s. I'm talking about the Benowitz affair and Roswell and MJ-12 and all of those stories. Now, if you want to know more about all of that stuff, look up the book Mirage Men by Mark Pilkington, and also the book Project Beta by Greg Bishop. Of course, I have no proof that Bob Pratt was the person who dealt with Beverly McKittrick. It could have been someone else. However, in her 2003 interview with Kenny Young, Beverly recalled a writer named Ben. Perhaps she confused Ben and Bob. Perhaps she confused Esquire magazine with the National Enquirer, although they are very different publications. And perhaps Beverly confused 1974 with 1983. Well, that is an awful lot of confusion. So our only real source for this yarn was one very easily bamboozled lady. She told Young that she decided to forget about the book and let Jackie live his life. But Jackie Gleason died in 1987. Why didn't she publish the story after his death? One possibility, maybe she fell out of contact with the writer who was to be her partner. Of course, she could have written the book on her own, but for most people, writing an entire book is not an easy job. Maybe conscience held her back. So that is theory one. Beverly McKittrick and a writer for the Enquirer decided to create a bestseller. But there are other possibilities. Theory 2. Perhaps Jackie Gleason concocted this tale to cover up an unexplained absence from his wife. Beverly McKittrick herself toyed with this idea. Her brief marriage to Gleason had been tempestuous, in large part because of her intense jealousy of other women. She told Kenny Young, "In the years afterward, I began to ask myself if any of this could really be true, or if he was just telling me that, perhaps having been out with someone. The reason I became iffy about it is because I wondered if it was really true. I mean, I believed it the whole time. I bought the story hook, line, and sinker. But if it was true, then why did he get so upset about it?" In other words, she thought he acted like a guilty man, not like a man profoundly troubled by a cosmic revelation. Finally, we have theory 3. I find this idea amusing. I don't dismiss it out of hand, but neither am I going to endorse it. Jackie Gleason was known to discuss Forteana on the radio. His interest in the subject was well known. A conspiratorially minded person might wish to consider a scenario in which he really was taken onto an Air Force base and shown mock-ups of alien cadavers. Perhaps the charade was an experiment in the propagation of rumor. Perhaps Air Force intelligence sought to increase belief in extraterrestrials. After all, the UFO mythos provides marvelous cover for tests of the latest advances in aerospace. Something very similar happened to documentary filmmaker Linda Moulton Howe. In 1983, she was invited onto Kirtland Air Force Base, where she was directed to read, but not copy, an elaborate collection of UFO documents. Most people believe that these documents were all fakes. Nobody really knows why that charade occurred, but occurred it did. I think Theory 1 remains the best bet, although Theory 2 does have a certain attraction. Bottom line, this whole tale depends upon the word of Beverly McKittrick. She was a drinker. She felt disgruntled. She was resentful. She needed money. In her chats with Kenny Young, she fastened onto a provable lie. She insisted repeatedly that the story was published in Esquire magazine in 1974 and that this publication played a role in her divorce. That article never existed. We must therefore conclude that her memory cannot be trusted. Now, some people have asked a reasonable question. If Beverly made up the story, why didn't Jackie Gleason deny it? Well, he did. According to UFO historian Jerome Clark, not a skeptic, in 1985, a Gleason associate told the Center for UFO Studies that Beverly made up the whole tale. Now, of course, I am always willing to be turned around. I would love to see some truly new evidence backed by good sourcing, but please take note, evidence means evidence, not conjecture, not rumor, not discussions of unrelated cases, and certainly not ad hominem attacks directed against yours truly. If you would like to see more strange tales flavored with a dose of critical thinking, please like and subscribe.